Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Twelve people have been killed and over 100 injured in a car bomb blast in Afghanistan's central Ghor province. Interior Ministry said the explosion occurred close to the police headquarters in the Firozkoh district. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating a new ceasefire agreement in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Earlier, Russia and France said both sides should abide by the latest truce. Over 600 people have been killed since the fighting broke out on the 27th of September. An arms embargo imposed on Iran by the United Nations Security Council has expired today. In a statement, Iran's foreign ministry says all restrictions on the transfer of arms have been terminated. Last month, the Security Council rejected a U.S. demand for an extension to the embargo. India has reported the world's highest COVID-19 deaths today as 1,033 people lost their lives overnight. The country's tally of infections is nearing 7.5 million as nearly 62,000 more people tested positive in a day. In Pakistan, 16 people have lost their lives to the virus, raising the death count to 6,654, while the global tally of coronavirus death has topped 1.1 million with more than 39.5 million infections. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. 12 people have been killed and over 100 injured in a car bomb blast in Afghanistan's central Ghor province. Interior Ministry said the explosion occurred close to the police headquarters in the Firozkoh district. Interior Ministry spokesperson Tariq Aryan said the Department of Women, Martyrs and Disabled Affairs Office was also hit. The provincial police chief said the number of casualties may rise. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the blast. Meanwhile, the Taliban say they have discussed the ongoing process of intra-Afghan talks with the German representatives in Doha. Spokesperson Mohammed Naeem said Mullah Abdul Haq Wasik, head of the European division of Taliban, met Marcus Potzel. The Taliban said both sides expressed their optimism about the progress in intra-Afghan negotiations. They said the German representative appreciated the Taliban stance that a dialogue is needed for solving the Afghan issue. Meanwhile, Chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah, is in Iran to discuss the Afghan peace process, while First Vice President of Afghanistan, Amrullah Saleh, has been given charge of Kabul's security. Now, Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating a new ceasefire agreement in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. Earlier, Russia and France said they mediated the latest truce amid escalation in violence.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called his Armenian and Azeri counterparts in the hours before the ceasefire announcement. He urged both parties to adhere to the deal brokered in Moscow last week. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed the ceasefire and stressed that it should be strictly respected by both parties. In a tweet, the Turkic Council also urged the Armenian forces to stop attacking civilians and to withdraw their occupying forces from Azerbaijan lands. Pakistan has also reaffirmed its support for Azerbaijan. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan facilitated the Azeri president and nation on their Independence Day. He also paid tribute to Azeri forces valiantly defending their territorial integrity. Over 700 people have been killed since the fighting broke out on the 27th of September.
Now, an arms embargo imposed on Iran by the United Nations Security Council has expired today. And in a statement, Iran's foreign ministry says all restrictions on the transfer of weapons and financial services have ended. It said the dissolution of curbs requires no new resolution, nor does it require any statement or any other measure by the Security Council. But Tehran said it was self-reliant in its defense and there was no need to go on a weapons buying spree. Now, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif called it a momentous day for the world. He said Iran has protected the Security Council resolutions 2231 and the 2015 nuclear deal despite U.S. efforts. Last month, a U.S. demand for an extension to the arms embargo was rejected by the Security Council. However, Washington unilaterally announced the restoration of all UN sanctions against Tehran. While also Turkey says the EU will collapse if it fails to address the Eastern Mediterranean issue in the balanced manner. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said this while visiting a drilling vessel. Erdogan said the bloc has become captive to Greece and Cyprus in the maritime dispute. The president also announced the discovery of an additional 85 billion cubic meters of gas in the Black Sea. Erdogan said the reserves are the largest hydrocarbon resources ever discovered in the country. Relations between the bloc and Ankara remain tense due to the maritime disputes in the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Israelis have again taken to the streets calling out Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation. Now, the anger is growing against Netanyahu, who is on trial for bribery, fraud and breach of trust. We have details in this report.
Scores of demonstrations are held across the country, while organizers say about 260,000 people participated nationwide. The crowd that rallied outside the Prime Minister's residence blew whistles and waved signs and flags. Demonstrators say Netanyahu is unfit to rule amid corruption indictment and for mishandling the COVID-19 pandemic.
Prime Minister is not Prime Minister, he's Crime Minister. We have criminal in the head of the state. And we come here, I think, the last 4 months, every night, we come and demonstrate that we want that he will go home.
The country is in a recession as a result of the pandemic. Unemployment, including people on open-ended furloughs, has soared to nearly 25%. Many of the protesters in Jerusalem include business owners, entrepreneurs, and workers who've lost their jobs.
Very, very dangerous situation. People are desperate. People don't have work. Old people. Holocaust survivors. They have no money. They have no education. Children need to be educated. There's no program. People feel they don't have a future.
Israeli media reported several incidents of violence by the far-right counter-demonstrators. In the northern city of Haifa, police said that they arrested 3 people.
Well, it's time for a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has been re-elected to a second term. With all results tallied, the Election Commission announced Ardern's Labour Party's victory with 49.1% of the votes. More details in this report.
New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern shot to global fame for her conduct and response to the terrorist attack in Christchurch. Ardern's prompt and comprehensive management of the COVID-19 pandemic beamed the spotlight even brighter on her. She not only won, but won big, managing an outright majority in the House. Ardern's contender Judith Collins accepted the result and congratulated the Prime Minister on her re-election.
My expectation is that we will form government within the next 2 to 3 weeks. There is precedent for governments to be formed before final counts are taken, when it's clear that a mandate exists. And it is clear in this case that a mandate exists for that. So whilst it will be another 3 weeks before we have that final result, my expectation is that we will work on government formation within that time frame.
She took the opportunity to criticize Ardern's economic policies and warned of its consequences.
New Zealand is now in recession. The International Monetary Fund has stated that New Zealand will, on current policy settings, be in a worse economic position in 5 years' time than other countries that we compare ourselves to. New Zealand is in for a tough economic ride.
No party had managed to win an outright majority in New Zealand since it introduced a voting system known as mixed member proportional representation in 1996. No party had managed to win an outright majority in New Zealand since it introduced a voting system known as mixed member proportional representation in 1996.
Well, now people are voting in the second round of runoff presidential election in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Prime Minister Ersin Tatar beat President Mustafa Akinci in the first round, but neither secured enough votes. Tatar from the National Unity Party won 32.35% of the votes, while Akinci got 29.84%. Tatar and Akinci present voters with differing vision for the future of the region. Akinci aims to seek a solution with Greek Cypriot counterparts to see the country become a federal binational state. Tatar, on the other hand, urges a federal state with Greek Cypriot administration is no longer possible. Bolivians will vote today in a presidential election after months of political deadlock. The country's entire 136-member legislative assembly will also be voted in. Winner needs more than 50% of the votes or 40% with a 10-point lead over the nearest challenge. If no candidate obtains a set percent of votes, a runoff between the top two contenders will be held on 28th of November. Former President Carlos Mesa and former Economy Minister Luis Arce are the leading contenders. Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Court says it will not report running preliminary vote totals as ballots are counted. Today's vote is a rerun of a chaotic October 2019 election which led to the resignation and exile of Morales. Now in the United States, women rallied across the country against President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett.
The participants said Barrett intends to restrict access to abortion and other civil liberties. They also chanted slogans against Trump. Events Executive Director Rachel O'Leary Carmona said Trump's presidency began with women marching and now it is going to end with women voting. Women gathered on Freedom Plaza in Washington for a midday rally. They later marched to the Supreme Court and ended the day with a text banking telethon. March organizers said the goal of telethon was to send 5 million text messages to encourage people to vote in the poll. This comes days before the country's presidential election on the 3rd of November.
Moving on, British Minister Michael Gove warns Brussels that London is well prepared for a no-deal Brexit. Gove says London will choose to shape its own future. In an article, the minister wrote London is increasingly prepared for Australian terms. Separately, in an interview, he said EU effectively ended the current round of talks last week, but Gove says the door is not closed on the deal. He said it will require a fundamental change in attitude, policy and politics from the EU to get things back on track. Gove said the chance of striking a post-Brexit trade deal has fallen. Now, India has reported the world's highest COVID-19 deaths today as 1,033 people lost their lives overnight. The country's tally of infections is nearing 7.5 million as some 62,000 tested positive in the last day. The global tally of coronavirus deaths has topped 1.1 million with more than 39.5 million infections. We have more details in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 is breaking grim records set by the first, forcing fresh lockdowns and travel restrictions across the world. On average, the virus is now infecting over 400,000 people around the world every day. In the US, states have rolled back plans of opening up economies and completely lifting restrictions. But at one of his rallies, President Donald Trump proposed locking all of those not in favor of lifting the curbs.
You got to get your governor to open up your state, okay? And get your schools open. Get your schools open. The schools have to be open, right? Lock them all up.
With local infections surging across Europe, France, UK, Italy, Cyprus and Spain are now grappling with an aggressive outbreak. But Australia has now started lifting major restrictions.
From 11:59 p.m. tonight, the following changes to restrictions will be made. There will be no time limit on leaving your home for exercise or for socialising. The travel distance from your home will move from 5 kilometres to 25 kilometres. Outdoor gatherings will increase to 10 people from 2 households.
In Asia, Indonesia and Thailand are also struggling to contain the transmission. Meanwhile, China seems to have dodged the threat of another outbreak after mass testing in Qingdao.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 16 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours, raising the death toll to 6,654. The Health Ministry said 567 people tested positive overnight. The ministry said there are 9,009 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 323,000 countrywide cases, more than 307,000 have recovered so far. The ministry added over 140,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 101,000 cases. In the capital, Islamabad, nearly 18,000 have been infected so far. Now, still in Pakistan, 10 people have died in an accident on the Gilgit-Skardu highway. The passenger bus plunged into a ravine after a landslide near the Tungus-Puri. The bus was carrying 15 passengers from Rawalpindi to Skardu. The authorities say the injured have been shifted to the hospitals. They say some people are in critical condition and fear more casualties. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. In Vietnam, 22 soldiers have gone missing after a landslide in the country's central Quang Tri province. This can be the largest military loss in peacetime as the country battles the worst flooding in years. In a statement, the government said the landslide struck a unit of Vietnam's 4th military region. It said bodies of 3 of the missing soldiers have been recovered. The water at the river's Quang Tri province has risen to highest level in over 20 years. Intense rains have caused floods and mudslides, killing at least 64 people in the country so far. Vietnam's weather agency says rain of as much as 600 millimeters is likely to continue in parts of the country. Now, floodwater from a breach in a reservoir has drowned houses and fields in northeastern Thailand. A patch of Lam Phra flowing reservoir dike collapsed amid the heavy downpour. Flooding in the Pak Chong Chai district has prompted authorities to discharge water to a nearby dam. The breach has flooded nearly 40 houses and threatened the livelihoods of local residents. Rescue workers used boats to distribute relief supplies to people in the flood-hit areas.
The impact is that it is getting difficult to commute around here because the roads are cut off. And eventually, we won't have enough water to use for the entire district. If all the water flows away from the reservoirs, we will be short of water.
Well, authorities forecast more rain in the coming days in a large swathe of Thailand. Now, more than a dozen pilot whales have died in New Zealand after breaching on the country's North Island. Department of Conservation said a pod of about 40 to 50 whales got stranded in the Coromandel Peninsula. It said rescuers and volunteers worked all day to refloat about 25 of the animals. The department said a high tide at night allowed stranded whales to float back into the deep waters. But despite efforts, many dead pilot whales were discovered at the site. Now, the elusive British street artist Banksy says a new artwork depicting a girl using a tyre as a hula hoop is his latest creation. The work appeared on Tuesday on the red brick wall of the beauty salon in Nottingham, England. Banksy posted a picture of the work in the student area of the city on his Instagram feed and website. Banksy is known for witty artworks that often make powerful references to world affairs. His works here have alluded to the coronavirus crisis and the Black Lives Matter movement. In August, he funded a boat crewed by volunteers to rescue refugees in the Mediterranean. In the age of microchips and video calls, a 65-year-old owner of a repair shop in Cairo is among the few not walking around with a mobile phone. More details in this report.
In the busy Adaba market in downtown Cairo, Hassanul Turki sits on a plush armchair at his phone repair shop. But there's something quaint about his premises. No mobile phones are allowed here, an image reminiscent of the early 20th century. His friends and relatives can instead reach him on his 1898 wooden box telephone. This is one of several vintage phones he owns.
This is my profession, repairing old telephones. My father's and my grandfather's, I inherited it from them. I love it because it is what we are good at. I could have been impacted by the mobile phone market. And if I didn't have any vision, I would have rented this shop for 20,000 Egyptian pound per month. But this is my job.
Turkey's collection includes a 1933 piece used by Egypt's late King Farouk and others once owned by Charlie Chaplin and Thomas Hudson. He buys pieces from auctions or collects those discarded in old palaces and villas, restoring them to working condition for other enthusiasts.
Definitely, there are a lot of people who come to my shop. Those who want to fix their landline telephones, they bring it here and I fix them.
Turkey sells some of these pieces and keeps others he intends to pass on to his sons.
Well, now, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow is ready for coordination with Saudi Arabia to support stability in the energy market. The Russian leader held a telephonic conversation with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In a statement, the Kremlin said the two leaders discussed the implementation of agreements by the OPEC+. It said both sides also deliberated on further cooperation in combating the spread of the novel coronavirus. The Kremlin said Putin and Prince Salman talked about prospects of using the Russian vaccine Sputnik V in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Venezuela sits on some of the world's largest crude reserves, yet faces regular gasoline shortages. Years of underinvestment and US sanctions have resulted in a swift fall in production within the OPEC nation. This report has details.
The fall in Venezuela's oil exports has starved President Nicolas Maduro's government of its main source of revenue. The drop has contributed to an economic collapse and left authorities short of cash for essential imports such as food and medicine. Venezuela's National Assembly legislator has pointed out several reasons for the worsening economic situation in the country.
The explanation for this decrease is basically the fall in the production of crude, disinvestment, lack of maintenance, loss of human capital, corruption, and of course, the isolation that Venezuela is going through. Which means that at this time, no large petroleum corporation wants to invest in Venezuela, much less sell its crude. That's basically the explanation of the current situation in Venezuela. Since the gas field have been shut for so long, they may require even larger investment than were previously estimated.
In June, Venezuela's oil exports slumped to their lowest level since 1943. A half a dozen tankers, looking to avoid the threat of US sanctions, sailed away from Venezuelan waters without loading. Not just them, tighter US curbs have scared away many other customers of the state-run oil firm and some shipping firms. President Maduro recently shared the numbers for the first time in public.
Between 2014 and 2019, Venezuela experienced the sharpest fall in the internal revenue in its history. This is perhaps the first time I'm referring to these numbers in public. In 6 years, we lost 99% of the volume of currency income. Saying it another way, for every $100 or euros the country received through the sale of the petroleum in 2014, today we received less than one.
Together with unreliable water, power and cooking gas supplies, the shortages have prompted a new wave of protests in Venezuela.
With that, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.